Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm John Fortney, the Director of Communication with the Senate Majority Caucus. That's the Senate Republican Caucus in the state Senate, the upper chamber, we like to call it. Great to have back on the program State Senator Andrew Brenner, and we're on location today from, what is the place called here? It's a great place.
This is Sawmill Creek Resort. It's owned by Cedar Point.
Owned by Cedar Point, and it's for an Ohio Chamber of Commerce convention.
Yep.
What I guess when we talk about commerce in the state of Ohio, the economy overall, and how do you feel the state is positioned right now as far as tax policy, economic development policy?
Well, it was just announced yesterday that we went from 7th in the nation for best businesses to 5th. So we are in the right track. We're heading in the right direction. We've been heading in the right direction pretty much since Kasich came in. We've been improving the economy by cutting regulations, and really it's the income taxes that we've really worked to rein in, and to the point where we now have and will have one flat income tax for the state of Ohio. 2.75%. We've had numerous tax brackets just a decade and a half ago, and I think that lowering has made us a lot more competitive and is bringing a lot of the jobs back into the state.
You know, we heard that from the other side of the aisle, how cutting the income tax doesn't equal economic development, and it's going to jeopardize the budget. But we've seen the exact opposite happen over the last 10 years when there were 9 marginal income tax brackets in the state. As you said, we're going to be down to one flat tax now, and we continue to run budget surpluses in the state of Ohio.
Yes, we do.
Correct. And we continue to see major investment coming in.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we have so much money. We've got a $4 billion plus budget surplus. But if you also count local governments, such as local school districts, they're at $10.5 billion in budget surpluses. So there's a lot of positive money sitting there that have been generated because, and this is after we've cut taxes.
Speaking of taxes, the flat tax, the income tax is always a big talker, of course, but really the biggest talker right now is when it comes to property tax reform. There is the effort right now, a petition drive that's happening to try to put an amendment on the ballot next year that would abolish property taxes in the state of Ohio. And the General Assembly has already addressed significant property tax reform. Oddly enough, the governor had vetoed the property tax reform that the General Assembly has passed. What do you think needs to happen? Are you in support of carrying through with a veto override?
I am. I believe my colleagues in the Senate are. The House voted to override one of basically 4 key vetoes on property tax reform. One of those vetoes that they overrode dealt with those renaming of the emergency levies and those continuing levies to try to rein that in, because what's happened over the years, there are many school districts who have emergency levies that have been around for 20, 30 years or more.
Not an emergency any longer.
No. And I think that for transparency and making sure that the voters know what they're voting for, eliminating those to doing, operating and clearly bond levies, those are one thing for buildings. But I think to have these reforms in place, giving your local budget commissions, which is made up of the auditor, the treasurer, and the prosecutor, oversight over making sure that the millage is correct and isn't collecting too much money from local taxpayers and then hoarding it locally, instead making sure it stays in the taxpayers' pockets, I think is important, especially people on fixed income. You have on almost every suburb in Ohio, it's probably at least $1,000 a month in property taxes. And, if somebody's on fixed income, they cannot afford that. Even middle class can't afford that.
Yeah, we heard, during the Select Committee on Housing, we heard retired teachers. This was a couple years ago. But we heard a couple retired teachers come out and say, my house has been paid for more than a decade, but I've been retired for this amount of time. I'm on a fixed income, and I'm worried I'm going to lose my house based on the property tax bill. I mean, that's really unacceptable.
Totally unacceptable. But you've got to have a fair system that collects from everybody. So I think that, we're going to pass, and I think that we're going to have to wait on the Ohio House to override the governor's other vetoes. When they do, I think we in the Senate will take them up. I have a feeling we will vote to override them. I believe we've got definitely the votes to do it. But I think we also need to look at a broader concept of the taxes themselves. I think maybe some of them should be converted to a sales tax, but that's something that's going to have to be put before the voters as a constitutional amendment. But I think that's going to be part of the discussion that's going to go on over the next year or so is, do we really need this many property taxes or the amount? And should we be adjusted and move it to something like a consumption tax, sales tax, so that everybody is paying into it versus, people who are on fixed income or people who are living in their homes.
Yeah, when you talk about emergency levies that have remained almost in perpetuity, that's a problem. And one of the key reasons why the General Assembly decided to do away with emergency and replacement levies was because they also are a way to somewhat, I would describe it as gaming the system, because those fall outside the parameters of that 20 mil floor. So they continue to raise more money as the valuations go up. Is that correct?
Correct. And in fact, like in my own county, I talked to our county auditor in Delaware County, and you were looking at $20+ million of additional revenue to local school districts. I think it was like 26 million just because of the 20 mil floor. So this is unvoted tax increase. Because of the valuations had gone up so substantially. And a lot of the increase is because of a housing shortage. A lot of it is due to inflation caused by federal government spending, and they're not reining in things at the federal level. So, but the housing prices have gone up 30, 40, 50 or more percent. And if you have that first 20 mils, it'll go up by whatever that value increase is. And I'll tell you, people cannot afford it. I'm hearing it. I know all my colleagues in the Senate are hearing it. We want to do something about it, and I think we will.
Well, you really have an insider's knowledge, too, of real estate and property. That's a big part of what you do for a living. So there's probably a lot of people out there that think, well, I can afford the house payment, and I have the 20% down, but can I afford the property taxes? That's got to be a key question, and that also hurts the economy.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you take a look at even the way the school districts are set up, a lot of people now cannot move into certain school districts because the property taxes are too high. They can't afford $1,200 or $1,500 per month in property taxes. Just a few years ago, $1,200 a month would be the full amount that somebody would maybe pay for their mortgage, and that would include your interest and principal taxes and insurance. And now, they're paying that just in property taxes. So it is something that has to be addressed. We will address it. I think, the governor does have his study committee. But we, as you pointed out, had a housing study committee, which I served on. And I've got to give credit to Michelle Reynolds, who actually just got one of the chamber's legislators of the year because of the housing discussion. And I think that is something that, we will continue to work on this, and it has to be worked on because if you have high property taxes, that also hurts the ability for housing stock. If you have a lot of government regulations that have increased the cost to build housing, that also increases the values faster than they otherwise would, which then in turn causes your property taxes to go up. So we've got to start reining in some of those other issues around it, such as overly burdensome government regulations that have driven up costs.
Well, for decades and decades, home ownership has been the one way to build wealth, individual wealth in America. It's the way people, start with the starter home, save to get the starter home, and then as their family grows, there are different types of, living conditions, or the next house and the next house. And then do we downsize? It's part of the cycle, but that's how you build wealth.
Absolutely. And a lot of people are building wealth, but the problem is if you can't afford to stay in it because the property taxes have gone through the roof, you're not going to keep that wealth long. And in fact, we're actually starting to see some corrections in the housing market where housing prices are going down in some markets. And even here in Ohio, you're starting to see them level off or fall because people just can't afford the higher values, but they also can't afford the property taxes.
School funding is basically makes up what, 70 to 75% of the property tax revenue
Correct.
at the local level. Is that
Yes.
accurate?
Approximately that.
You're the chair of the Senate's Education Committee. I guess one of the bottom line questions that we continue to hear is schools, do they have enough money?
That's a funny question, because if you count local, state, and federal dollars in K-12, we're spending about $27 billion per year in education. About half of which is local property taxes. A large chunk of it comes from state income taxes, general revenue fund, lottery profits, and then you've got federal dollars that come in as well. And if you add all those dollars up, I believe the average now in the state of expenditures per student is over $16,000 per student. You've got urban districts ranging from 25 to 35, 37, 38,000 per student. But you're not also seeing, what we should expect is good student performance, really good outcomes, and seeing students that are able to go into the workforce. I mean, we've changed some things there too, but when you've got this ongoing dynamic of high property taxes, and then local schools saying, well, we don't have enough money, but then they don't do things like consolidate their schools. We've had districts in Ohio, we've seen a 5% decline in student enrollment in traditional districts since 2020 alone. So you should start seeing some districts, in some districts we've seen 30-40% declines in student population since 2020. This is just 5 years. And yet they're still operating with the same number of teachers, same number of school buildings. There needs to be some tough management decisions at the local level, and they need to start, reducing their footprints. And yes, it hurts, and I understand that, some people can have a problem, but if your locals can't pay the property taxes to keep the school open to begin with, you've got to make better decisions.
You have to be responsible to the taxpayers, and sometimes it does take tough decisions and some backbone from the school board to say, listen, we need to do some consolidating here, whether it's buildings or if districts can come together as well to maximize the value and find the synergy there for the taxpayers. Over the last 3 budgets, the legislature has invested an additional $4 billion into K through 12 education. So it's hard to understand when you hear school systems that are carrying $10.1 or $10.5 billion cash carryover statewide saying, we don't have any money. Because did a little research, and I was, Senator O'Brien was on.
Yes,
The podcast
I heard,
last week. So she's a former elementary education, she's a former school teacher, county auditor. And I was looking at the beginning cash balance for Columbus City Schools for this year, $394 million beginning cash balance. Forecast for next year to be $327 million, and in fiscal year 27, $223 million. Which is kind of mind-boggling when you think that a metropolitan district could be carrying that kind of cash carryover. And yet, they just asked for and passed a new levy last year. It's because nobody seems to understand. A simple question is, what's your cash on hand right now? Well, you can find out by going to the Department of Education and Workforce website.
Absolutely. Not only that, but I know Columbus Public is actually looking to potentially increase. They want another 50 million. They say they're going to be 50 million short, so they're going to go back to the taxpayers again. Yet we know they have about 40 to 50 buildings they probably should close and consolidate to make their system much more efficient, which would help their taxpayers out. It would help their taxpayers out. It would help the taxpayers all over the state, because it's all the tax dollars and, from income and everything else that goes to the state, that goes to these local districts. And if they don't make tough decisions in some districts, but they do in others, that's not fair. And I think you've got to start holding those districts that aren't making the tough decisions accountable.
Well, it's not only about what their budget's like and what they're spending per pupil, but I looked it up. The most recent school report card for Columbus City Schools had a 4-year graduation rate of 78% and a 5-year of 82%. Cleveland's 4-year was 75%, 4-year was 75%, and their 5-year graduation rate was 80%. When you're spending that much money, and I know there's a different just economic environment and just a larger student body and students coming from all different backgrounds and languages. But when you're spending that kind of money with a cash carryover of $394 million and your 4-year grad rate is 78%, those are not the results that taxpayers and families should be looking for.
Well, not only that, many of those students are graduating and they probably shouldn't be because they're still having a hard time reading their diplomas, can't do math. Math rates are still horribly low. And so for the amount of money that we're spending of taxpayer money to try to educate these students, and in Columbus, you're looking at about $25,500 per student. That's just not an acceptable. I have 20% of your students fail and not get a diploma. That's appalling, and that's a crisis.
Are we still feeling the effects of COVID? Because I believe you and I have talked on prior podcasts that it became difficult to figure out where kids were. Where they weren't home, but they weren't learning, and then it was just like they disappeared, and truancy officers didn't even have an idea where to look.
Correct.
Are we still feeling the effects 5 years after COVID?
Absolutely, we are. In fact, I know Dr. Atkins is running for governor. Unfortunately, many of the policies she put in place as the health director, and it was her advice, led to a massive disruption of our entire education system. You have kids that became chronically absent that skyrocketed. So you've got some school districts where 50, 60% of the kids have been chronically absent. Those rates are thoroughly unacceptable. They have not improved. The state report cards are coming out in a couple weeks. I suspect you'll see some improvement in English. I don't think you're going to see much improvement in math. And kids have to have a balanced education. If they can't read and they can't do math, there's not a whole lot they can do in the real world.
Well, and you shouldn't be going on to the next grade either.
Correct.
Shouldn't just be promoted just to promote you to the next grade and be somebody else's problem. Either you know how to do it or you don't.
Correct.
And that's why COVID had such a impact of maybe one grade level, maybe two for some students.
We have some that it was like 3 grade levels. You've got kids that I've talked routinely to schools. I talked to community schools, school choice schools, and even traditional schools, kids coming back a couple years behind, 3 years behind, yet they somehow continue to get promoted. It's just not acceptable. They've got to help get these kids remediated. That should be a top priority. I know that's a top priority here of what we want to do, and I've talked to the DeWine administration, and they want to make sure that's a top priority as well.
And that's also the beauty of the embracement of the EdChoice scholarship, of the Education Choice Scholarship, where parents finally have said, this is not the right environment for one reason or another. It's available on a sliding scale based on income. The more you make past a certain level, then the less you would get to qualify for the EdChoice program. But parents have been vilified by the left for embracing something that allows them to find the best learning environment for their student that will lead to success, will lead to maybe college or whatever it is, but a career where they are well qualified, right, because of the right educational environment. The money spent on EdChoice, we hear the left say, well, that should be going to public schools. Well, it seems that an additional $4 billion over the last 3 budgets and the average per pupil spending being more than $16,000 with a $10.1 collective billion dollar cash carryover, you would seem to think that maybe you have enough money and another whatever it is, $1 billion and $990 million isn't going to make a difference.
Yeah, marginally speaking, they've got plenty of cash. They've got the ability to be able to hire the specialists, the tutors, whatever they need. But here's the other thing. We put in the budget, and the governor put it in, we kept it in, to make sure that we can collect the data of what's going on. They keep claiming, oh, there's teacher shortages. Well, the state of Ohio doesn't know where those teacher shortages are. Are they in special needs? Are they in math? Are they in English? What do we need and where do we need it? And so we're going to start collecting that data to know what is going on really in our schools. And we have not been collecting it up until now. So I think that's very important, especially when like a teachers union comes out and says, oh, well, we got, teacher shortages everywhere. We need to raise the pay. Well, really, do you? Or is it maybe some areas where you need to raise pay, other areas you have plenty of teachers? And that would actually also bode well to help with our colleges of education. I mean, if they're graduating a bunch of teachers where there's already a surplus of teachers, it would be good to know, okay, we need more in a particular area. So collecting that data, I think, will help with management. It'll help with the management of the supply of teachers going in, and it will also help with making sure that the teachers in the parts of the state that need a particular type of teacher as specialty, they'll be able to get them.
Yeah, results matter, grades matter,
Yep.
even bad grades matter, and then you can figure out exactly where we're falling short or what
Yep.
needs to happen at the local level for
Correct.
these schools to start improving and really, educating children the way they should be educated. One thing that you have taken a hard line on, because there is a state law that talks about public schools, public transportation,
Oh, yes.
and the buses. If you're enrolled in a private school, but you live within, for example, the Columbus Public School District, by law, Columbus must transport that student to their school. But this has not been the case. And so you've been very vocal about what you think needs to happen. What should happen, in your opinion?
Well, they should transport the kids. The state of Ohio, and this is another misnomer, and I had to squelch this, it was out recently. Each school district is paid to transport all the kids in their district, regardless of whether they're going to a traditional public school, a charter school, or a chartered non-public school. So if they're going to a Catholic school, that school district is paid to transport those kids to that school. So it's not like this is money that's coming from somewhere else or locally. No, this is money that the state is making sure that they're paid to cover the cost of transporting those kids. They then turn around and don't. We actually have one school system who has already determined that they're not going to transport kids of special needs to schools that specialize in that. That's insane. So things that we can do to fix that is, if you're a kid that's in a school district and within those boundaries, they should be transported regardless. If you're a kid with special needs, they should be transported regardless. If you're a child that is going to a charter non-public school or is in a EdChoice scholarship, and they're within the boundaries of their county, they should be transported, and they should be able to find a way to transport them. If the local district can't do it, then they need to find another way to do it. And they're paid to do this. And if this means we need to go to some sort of countywide transportation systems and then synchronize everybody's bell schedules, maybe we need to do that. Because we have literally got thousands of kids are chronically absent or having problems because the districts are not picking the kids up and transporting them to the schools.
Yeah, I was surprised. I think I read one story that said the school district would rather pay a fine for not transporting these students than to try to make a reasonable attempt to figure out a schedule where they could do so, which you're talking about millions of dollars. I was really shocked to read that.
Columbus Public literally put in their budget a budget line item to pay the state fines instead of transporting the kids. And I think it was in the $15 million range. That is just appalling. To me, another way we can do that is potentially to go after the qualified immunity of the school board members. If you're voting to flagrantly violate state law, you are no longer protected from the state of Ohio. If you make bad decisions, you can be individually sued. And I think if we start allowing on certain, we got to make sure it's tailored properly, because I don't just want, frivolous lawsuits either. But if you know that board members are doing a public vote that is flagrantly violating state law, like budgeting to pay the fines instead of transporting the kids, you lose your qualified immunity. I think that's something we need to consider, and I think it's something we should pass into law.
State Senator Andrew Brenner, chairman of the Senate's Education Committee, thanks so much for your time and insight today. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.